So, Twitter locked out Kayleigh McEnany for tweeting out the New York Post article. And that seems like a pretty big escalation for the world's biggest communications platform to lock out the White House press secretary. Pretty remarkable, pretty ballsy. But, I think the big news today, obviously the fact that Twitter and Facebook both decided at the behest of progressive journalists to go ahead and block, essentially prevent you from even posting the New York Post article based on completely arbitrary new policies that they just invent anytime. It's brazen, as somebody says. It is truly brazen. And, it's funny looking back because I remember 2 years ago, I was out here on Periscope saying things like, we need to regulate big tech. If you're against regulating big tech and you're a conservative, you're wrong. And I got so much pushback from like the libertarians and the establishment. They're like, no, what about like the worst consequences or unintended consequences and regulation always never works and blah, blah, blah. I don't hear any of that anymore. I just hear nonstop like, oh yeah, that was a good idea. Actually, we should totally regulate big tech. The libertarian case against regulation has disappeared. The fact that these companies are powerful enough to think that they can go ahead and essentially block a historically large journalistic outlet from posting an article and get away with it is just an intense escalation. But it's reflective of the fact that who's going to stop them? Who's going to stop them? Nobody in the next 30 days. And if they get Biden in, certainly nobody's going to stop them then. From their perspective, it's the safe thing to do. But it wasn't that hard to see all this coming. It wasn't. These companies clearly had monopolies in 2018. They were already starting to flex their muscle a little bit with things like banning Paul Joseph Watson from Facebook, like playing games with conservative websites, de-verifying people. They were already this has been a slow motion train wreck. And it's been really obvious for a really long time. And I'm glad to see finally that the libertarian case against big tech regulation has completely collapsed, and that we're gonna move forward actually as a conservative movement. And I remember 2 years ago I wanted to create a world in which if you were a conservative and you were against big tech regulation, that everybody would just obviously see you as wrong. That it would be a very basic litmus test for conservatives, in the same way that you can't be a conservative and be for tax hikes. Well, I say that you can't be a conservative and be against big tech regulation because there's no reason to hand power over your political movement to a couple of unaccountable Silicon Valley companies. I see no reason to do that. But I look back at the things we did. We launched a petition in August 2018 to get President Trump to protect digital speech in the public square. That got over 100,000 signatures. Nothing happened. We got, I wrote platform access as a civil right back in May of last year. That got a little traction. We've had some success in the last year and a half. President Trump's gotten more and more interested as Twitter has gotten more aggressive against him personally. But now, it's amazing to see the conservative movement unify around the goal of regulating these companies. And the funny thing is, if we had done it earlier, there might have been a more modest reform. Now I used to be joking about nationalizing these companies, but I'm seeing a lot of people being supportive of the idea that actually, that's okay. Like, let's go ahead and nationalize Facebook and Twitter. Like, it's unclear why they need to remain private companies. After all, again, if they were public companies, then if they were like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac when they were publicly owned, then they'd be subject to First Amendment restrictions in the same way that public universities are subject to First Amendment restrictions. Cernovich says, I don't care if Democrats crush them all. Yeah. Why should we be invested in the health of Facebook and Twitter? Why would we care? Like, okay. You alienated your only potential allies and you've decided that you want power to be in the hands of people who want to destroy your companies. Good bet. Go for it, guys. Like, we'll sit here and we'll bully anybody who defends Facebook and Twitter from your onslaught and prevent that from happening. Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned, like, break them up. Okay, like, Facebook's got a bunch of different businesses, WhatsApp, Instagram. They can all be divested. Like, let's make Facebook and Instagram compete against each other. I'm sure that would be really good for advertisers, among other things. Twitter can just be straight nationalized. We can just sell that. Think about it. Twitter's market cap's only $36 billion. The federal government could just buy it out wholesale, like announce a tender offer. We're buying it out. We're paying out, paying market value for the shares, and then we'll sell it to Peter Thiel for $1 or something. But we don't. I mean, here's the thing I want to make clear, and this is something like we don't actually have to put up with this. It's totally a matter of political will, right? The question. This is not something like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? This is a $36 million company facing off against the federal government. It doesn't get to win if we don't want to let it. So we can put an end to this if we get control of the government, which is why you need to go out and vote Republicans. I mean, honestly, like Democrats might break it up and do harm to it in other ways, but certainly, like I'd rather have the government be in the hands of Republicans because I think ultimately the pressure will go the different direction if Democrats are in power. I think their pressure will be that you're not censoring enough, you're not doing enough to get rid of speech we don't like. Somebody says they'll just move offshore. Look, you can't escape the jurisdiction of the federal government by just moving offshore. Like what happened? Think about like Pirate Bay and Napster. Like those companies aren't still around, and that's the way maybe we need to think about like a Twitter privately owned that's deciding to meddle in federal elections. That they're sort of like a Napster or a Pirate Bay. I mean, think about how angry our legislators got about Napster and Pirate Bay. God forbid they steal the IP of the record companies. Well, these guys are interfering in a federal election and crushing the conservative movement, and like Congress is set to twiddle its thumbs. It's kind of BS. Yeah, no, nationalize them. And then if we have somebody says we need to either make them irrelevant or threaten government action. So yeah, I think that's right. We need to make them irrelevant or threaten government action. And Parler is not the answer, guys. Parler is not the answer. If it were the answer, everybody would already moved over. Like there's been so many instances of big tech behaving egregiously. And what happens is everybody moves over to Parler for like a day, and then everybody comes back to Twitter because Twitter has a monopoly on public square social media. That's where all the journalists are, it's where all the celebrities are, etc. Right? Like I'm happy Parler exists. I hope it could be more competitive. But the idea that Parler is the answer to our prayers, it would have been the answer before, right? Like we're still all on Twitter, even as more and more people get banned, even as somebody like Carpe gets banned. Like we can't. Parler's grown, great. It's not competing. In fact, the Democrats want us to go to Parler. They want us to abandon the project of trying to have any meaningful influence over the media, over public square, right? Like it's not the answer. It's not. And it's honestly one of the things that frustrates me is like I like the people who run Parler, but to me it serves as this kind of like amulet for the libertarians in Congress to cling to. It's an excuse as to why we don't have to do anything. We don't have to use our power to protect our constituents on Twitter and Facebook. We can just say Parler exists and say go to that. Right? No, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear from Ted Cruz or anybody else about how they're setting up a Parler account. I want to hear from them about how they're taking Twitter's power away. I want to hear about what are they doing as U.S. senators to wield the power they have to make Twitter behave, right? We do not have to let Twitter interfere in our elections. We do not have to let Twitter or Facebook abuse conservative citizens, right? Like, the rallying call of the civil rights movement was not, we need to build our own restaurants. That was not the rallying call. The rallying call is, no, you're going to let us sit in the restaurants that exist. The rallying call of the civil rights movement was not build our own motels in the Jim Crow South, build our own, restrooms. That was not how it worked. That's not what their attitude was. So, we need to think. I'm tired of hearing I'm tired of hearing let the free market work, build your own Facebook, as though that wouldn't have happened already, right? It is not. There may be some way to compete with Facebook or Twitter, but one thing that's obvious: you cannot compete with them on the grounds that you don't censor and they do, right? It's just not. It's not a viable competitive axis. It's not. Not like the competitive moat that Twitter and Facebook have is enough to overcome any marginal benefit that you gain from not having a censor. So somebody's like, I built my own payment processor. Great. Congratulations. Let me know when you build a social media platform with 1 billion users. Exactly. Like this is, essentially abandoning Twitter is conceding defeat in the modern social media public square. It's conceding defeat, conceding that we shouldn't have the right to, participate in public discourse. It's just absolutely silly. So that's that's what I have to say there. It's a real. I mean, big tech has some big time ego, and they may be right. They may sway the election for Biden. They may win. Who knows? But if they don't, the debate needs to be over in the conservative movement, right? It needs to be over. Like if you're still a conservative talking about how terrible it is to regulate big tech and how we just have to let Facebook and Twitter, you're a clown now. Like you're a clown, and that's the way it should be. You're a clown. How does anything change? They own Kamala. Kamala? How do you say her name? Yeah. What's up with Jim Jordan? Jim Jordan needs to give his the money he was donated by Google back. I'm tired of hearing about how conservative politicians take money from Google and Facebook and Twitter. Do we let them take money from George Soros? No. Do we let them take money from China? No. You don't get to take money from Google, Facebook, and Twitter. Your job is to be adversarial to them and represent us against those companies. It is not to represent those companies against your constituents. Stop taking conservatives. Do not let conservatives take Facebook, Twitter, Google money. Period. Enough. Right. Yeah, Parler is basically like a ghetto. Parler is a social media ghetto. The answer to not being allowed in the rest of society is not to retreat to the ghetto. The answer is to demand your place in the rest of society. Right. Like Parler is a social media ghetto. So enough. Jim Jordan needs to give back his money. Somebody says this guy's a Biden crony. What are you talking about, clown? Right. Wait till they try and suppress election results. Yeah, I have no idea what they're going to do, but I don't doubt that they're going to do something crazy. So, anyway. So that's what I got. I got to take care of a few things. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.